Similar to vicarious trauma, we also have this other phenomenon called traumatic countertransference. So, countertransference is simply when the professional's projecting their own past onto the client, or more specifically, projecting someone from their own past onto the client. Traumatic countertransference, then, is when the countertransference is related to past trauma. That the professional has their own experience of past trauma that's unresolved and that's being activated and projected onto the client. Now, often when the therapist or the professional is experiencing countertransference, it also means that the client might also be experiencing transference, which is where the client is projecting someone from their past onto the therapist. So there's a sort of reciprocal nature to transference and countertransference. And it can be a really tough thing to work with in therapy, although it also can be a source of incredible repair and healing when we learn how to skillfully work with transference and countertransference. And they both are really unavoidable in trauma therapy, completely unavoidable. Some people would even argue that transference and countertransference are always shaping our experience and impacting us in every single relationship that we have, every single therapy session, and even in our relationship with our supervisors, our professors, our trainers, and the leaders of our organizations. Now, traumatic countertransference can be really stressful. It's triggering and activating the past trauma of the professional. And therefore, it can really fuel vicarious trauma, secondary traumatic stress, compassion fatigue, and burnout. It's something that's usually experienced within the relationship with a client, but it also can be experienced elsewhere. And it can be a real source of stress if you're experiencing traumatic countertransference or transference with your supervisor or with the leaders or other colleagues within your organizations. Now, in the research, there was a summary of the research, and they found 5 specific things that organizations can do to reduce the impact of traumatic countertransference, vicarious trauma, and burnout. And these are the 5 different things. Organizations can provide ongoing and consistent supervision for staff, especially for newer and younger clinicians. And newer and younger therapists are at a higher risk for burnout and secondary traumatic stress than more experienced therapists. The second thing, organizations can cultivate peer support for staff within their organizations, opportunities for the coworkers to come together to support each other. The third thing is that organizations can reduce or rotate direct service hours if possible. So to shift the position of staff members so that the same staff member isn't always the one leading the group or isn't always the one doing the crisis interventions or isn't always the one who's managing the crisis calls or the hotline, but that there's some sort of rotation that gives people a break. The fourth thing organizations can do is provide training and education related to trauma for their staff. And the fifth and final thing organizations can do is to empower staff to address their own trauma by encouraging or providing or funding opportunities for counseling and personal growth. So these are 5 things organizations can actively do to support their staff in reducing burnout and vicarious trauma. So I want to pause for a moment and challenge you to consider, how do you navigate your own experience of traumatic countertransference and navigate your own experience of vicarious trauma? If you're a professional working in the field, you're going to experience countertransference and vicarious trauma at some point, if not already. And how are we going to navigate it when we're experiencing it? How will we even be aware of when it's impacting us? Many times these can be things that happen unconsciously, and we might not even be aware that it's happening. How can we create habits or structures within our work life that help prevent burnout for ourselves, for our staff members, and for others in the agency. So these are bigger questions that I encourage everyone to reflect on. I don't necessarily have all the answers to these questions, and the answers and solutions are going to be different from person to person and organization to organization. But I'm hoping some of this video and this chapter can shed some more light and offer some other options to answering these questions.